All right, for this segment, we got our friend Nick Patrick coming on to talk about some college football. We're going to talk about the top QBs coming out of college this year into the NFL draft. But first, we want to talk about last night's national championship game between Alabama and Ohio State. Alabama was the number one team coming into the college football playoff. Ohio State was the number three team. And honestly, this game turned into pretty much a blowout. It stayed pretty close through the first quarter and a half or so, but then it got out of hand. And so we're gonna get Nick Patrick's take on the national championship from last night. Nick, did you see the potential before the game of it turning into this type of a blowout?
First of all, thanks for having me on. Hello, both of you. This definitely could have turned into a blowout. Vegas odd makers had it at -9 towards Bama, which in this type of high caliber game, that's a pretty large spread coming into it. And with the firepower Alabama has, compared to the firepower Ohio State doesn't have, it could have turned into a blowout, which eventually happened.
Yeah, Devontae Smith had 215 receiving yards for Alabama, three touchdowns after only about two quarters of production. Final score was 52-24. Any other notes from this game?
I know everyone's talking about Devonta Smith, and for good reason, as you said, the 215 and three touchdowns. But I really want to talk about Najee Harris. There was a lot of times during this game where Najee Harris may have not put up the box numbers. Averaging 3.6 yards a carry, and only had a long of 13. But so many times Najee Harris was in the backfield, and it just looked like, man, Ohio State's blowing this up, and Najee Harris is carrying one of the linemen for 3 extra yards. I think he was a huge factor to this win for Alabama last night, because Ohio State couldn't really stop that. And he put up 2 touchdowns in goal line situations. And another thing was not only Devonta Smith went off, John Meach III, another up-and-coming Alabama wide receiver. He popped off, and he had 8 catches for 81 yards. He's a guy to look out for next year.
All right, so now we're going to get into the quarterbacks. Obviously, everybody at the top of their board has Trevor Lawrence. I just want to get your thoughts on if you think that it's a done deal that he's going to be in Jacksonville, and do you think year one he's going to be able to just be productive right out the gate?
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence is by far the number one, and for good reason. He's going to go to Jacksonville. He's one of you'll hear about this later. My quarterbacks, it really depends on what the coach wants to do, and no matter what the coach is in Jacksonville, they're going to take Trevor Lawrence, and for good reason. Within 20 yards and in, there's not a more accurate quarterback in college football. He just has a missile within 20 yards and in, and his football IQ. In the Alabama game, in his freshman year in the national championship, he locked onto his reads. He wasn't really going through progressions. He wasn't reading the defenses all well, but coming into his second and third year, he took it up another notch with that football IQ. And he's a tough guy. If the pocket's collapsing, he's not going to just sit down and take it. He's going to run through a defender if he has to. He's a tough guy, and that's what they need in Jacksonville. And he's a leader. Something they need in Jacksonville as well. The one thing, though, with every pro, there's a con, and for Trevor Lawrence, that's his deep ball. It's not as well as you want it to be, which is not that big of a problem. It's more like he has too much confidence in his arm almost, where he just lost the ball. And in the NFL, there's a lot of times in college where it wasn't picked off, and the NFL will be kicked off. And if you look at games like in Virginia Tech, he's throwing deep balls in triple coverage where that's a pick in the NFL. He just needs to sharp on that, but he is one of the best-looking quarterbacks to come out since Andrew Luck for sure.
All right, and from my understanding, you have Zach Wilson as your number 2 QB, and there's a couple QB-needy teams right after Jacksonville. The Jets are picking number 2 overall as of right now. The Dolphins are at 3, but then the Falcons again are at 4, and it seems like the Jets and Falcons could be teams that might be looking at a quarterback. Do you see a QB going at 2 to the Jets, and would it be Zach Wilson?
To answer the first question, in my opinion, it comes down to who they hire. If Adam Gase was still the head coach, I would say they go a different route in quarterback, but we all knew he was going to be fired. It just matters who they bring in as their head coach and if they like Darnold or not. because at that number 2 slot, you have one of the best tackles, Penei Sewell, to maybe build around Darnold, and then if you don't like Darnold after this year, go grab that quarterback, but you still have one of the best tackles in this draft. And if you decide to go quarterback, I think it should be Zach Wilson. His anticipation with his throw sets up his receivers better than anyone. Maybe Mac Jones does it better. That's one of Mac Jones' real strengths, and maybe Zach Wilson does that better than him. I mean, some of these throws Zach Wilson makes, it has Patrick Mahomes sort of magic to it. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but the magic Patrick Mahomes brings to his passes, it's almost like Zach Wilson does that. And with Zach Wilson, his cons or his knocks are very similar to Patrick Mahomes coming out of college. You know, the footwork and mechanics still need a little tooling, but that can come with the right coach, like Patrick Mahomes had with Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy. And another thing for Zach Wilson, his pocket awareness could use some work. There's a lot of times where he took sacks because of it. And then he also tries to play hero ball because everyone wants to be Patrick Mahomes, you know? So that's another knock on Zach Wilson, but he is something special, for sure.
Excellent evaluation on Zach Wilson. I would say that's who most people have as their top 2 quarterbacks in the draft. I'm really curious to see who you have as your number 3 quarterback and where you see him landing and kind of just your evaluation of him in general.
So number 3 is Justin Fields. The big 3, you know, Lawrence, Wilson, Fields. Many people have Wilson and Fields swap, but I have Fields at 3. And where he could go in this draft, I mean, he can go to the Jets. I think the idea of the Dolphins taking a quarterback is pretty ridiculous, in my opinion. But then you have the Falcons at 4. The Falcons could also trade out of that spot. You know, someone like 49ers, Patriots, Bears, Colts trade up, maybe to grab Justin Fields at 4. But Justin Fields, kind of like Zach Wilson, he's a gunslinger. Very athletic, and Justin Fields can be that franchise guy. But with Justin Fields, his decision-making needs to improve under pressure. He just folds under pressure sometimes, and that really needs to improve. But, again, Justin Fields, number 3, still going to be a top 4 pick, in my opinion.
All right, and then right after, or a little bit after the Falcons, we got some other QB-needy teams coming up. One that stands out to me is maybe the Lions, maybe looking to move on for Matthew Stafford at 7. But there's also, as you mentioned, could be some teams looking to trade up. So who do you have at 4 here?
At 4, he moved up based off of last night, and that's Mac Jones. He's a guy who just knows the game of football, being at Bama, backed up for 2 years, took his time, got his chance. And like Zach Wilson, as I said before, the anticipation with Mac Jones' throws is some of the best. If you look at Alabama, he sets it up his wide receivers to where they can have amazing yards after catch numbers, and that's what you want in the quarterback, and it proved in the stat sheet. Alabama's wide receivers were second in the nation in yards after catch, totaling over 2,000 yards over the season, and that's due to the timing and anticipation of Mac Jones' throws, and also them getting open. And in order to be like that, I mean, the anticipation, timing, accuracy, that's Mac Jones. The downside of Mac Jones is the arm strength is not great, but when you have that sort of accuracy, it almost makes up for it. And something I kind of thought about, he's never really been down and out, and that's something you have to take into that evaluation. I was listening to Joel Klatt earlier today, and talking to Matt Leinart. Matt Leinart was never really punched in the mouth and never had to come back. He was always just winning. And how you're going to transition to the NFL is something we have to see. Maybe he falls like Matt Leinart or excels. And team-wise, there is that gap of Lions, and this is all pre-free agency, so we really don't know what's going on with quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Usually with the Lions, Matt Stafford could leave. Panthers can move on from Teddy. Broncos, new GM, maybe not moving on from Drew Lock. And then a little further down, you have Niners, Patriots, Washington, Bears, Colts that could also move up. So then you have Mac Jones falling into that mid-first round. But I have another guy ranked below Mac Jones, in my opinion, going in that top 10, and that's right spin into the Panthers at 8 is Trey Lance. Now, Trey Lance opted out this year, which is something many people probably didn't want to see because they want to see Trey Lance play football. And Trey Lance is out of North Dakota State. You're prototypical dual threat quarterback. His ability to extend the plays is the best in the draft, in my opinion. That's what he excels at most. And the touch on his deep ball sometimes is just, I mean, excuse my language, but it's football porn. When I was watching him, I'm like, he kind of looks like Deshaun Watson out there, where he's a pass-first quarterback who can run, and that's Deshaun Watson. That's what I see in Trey Lance. And with Trey Lance, he just needs to key on those little things, your footwork, your mechanics, just tiny little techniques and stuff like that can come with it. If he gets a good coach, he will be successful in the NFL. It's almost like, in my opinion, he's almost like a project because he has everything, but he just needs to hone in on those little things, almost like a Josh Allen a couple years ago. And Josh Allen got his coach. Trey Lance gets his coach. He can do great things in the NFL.
All right, and then for the sixth and final quarterback we're going to be talking about, looks like you got Kyle Trask. Any idea of what his pros and cons are? It looks like he'd probably be going a little later in the first, maybe mid-first, depending on how it shakes out, but give us your analysis on him.
Yeah, Kyle Trask he peaked up in October, early November. He really peaked. He's clear Heisman frontrunner, just kind of tanked. But I have him slated to the Colts right now, barring, maybe they go and cut Carson Wentz. But I feel like Kyle Trask just fits the Colts more than other QBs, where they don't have to trade up and get a quarterback. Kyle Trask is essentially Phil Rivers. Extremely accurate, not very mobile, but he can make a whole bunch of throws. He has great touch with his ball throws, and the reason why we've seen him fall so far is he had a rough bowl game against Oklahoma. He threw 3 picks. One of them was not his fault, but 2 of them were just like terrible decisions, and that's something Phil Rivers does. Phil Rivers just sometimes makes terrible decisions with the ball where you're just scratching your head, and that's sometimes with Kyle Trask. And I feel like that was a great comp, but don't get me wrong, he's still first-round talent, late first round, but there's definitely more question marks with Kyle Trask than the other 5.
So I just want to ask you, do you think all 6 of these quarterbacks are going to go in the first round?
I could see, you automatically have 3, I believe, going in the top 5 at least, or top 4, I should say. Bengals aren't taking a quarterback, so top 4. I feel fairly confident Lawrence, Wilson, Fields are going to be in that top 3. And then it's essentially Mac Jones, Trey Lance. I feel like one of those QB-needy teams from 8 to 15 will take Mac Jones and Trey Lance. And then you have Kyle Trask, who's sitting down towards the bottom of my list personally, and a lot of people out in the industry, where you have Washington, Bears, and Colts down there who knows, maybe even Steelers, Saints area. But I do believe with the quarterback situation as it is in the NFL, there's a lot of QB-needy teams, and I do believe we'll see 6 quarterbacks go in the first round.
Yeah, it'd be really cool to see Kyle Trask go later in the draft to just a really solid organization that's kind of already got a great team. They need that solid quarterback to get them over the hump. I also really, really liked your Josh Allen, Trey Lance comparison. Nick, we just like to thank you so much for coming on today, giving your evaluations of the draft and the game last night. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, that's it. Thank you for having me on, and yeah.
No problem.